Hello, everyone. I thought we could talk about biowarfare, biological weapons. ActionLime.org, the Lyme Crime Whistleblowers website, has put together the crimes against humanity. So let's talk about this page here where we have Plum Island. The outline introduction says CDC shows us how to aerosolize, desiccate, or weaponize Borrelia into the cyst or spheroplast form in 1964. Mycoplasma and vector pathogen competent studies performed on Plum Island, selling such fungi and other biological and chemical weapons to Saddam Hussein. At a hearing before the Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs in the United States Senate on May 25, 1994, they discussed the U.S. exports of biological materials to Iraq. The Senate Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs has oversight responsibility for the Export Administration Act. And in records available from the supplier for the period of 1985 into the present show that during this time, pathogenic, meaning disease-producing, toxigenic, meaning poisonous, and other biological research materials were exported to Iraq pursuant to application and licensing by the U.S. Department of Commerce. Records prior to 1985 were unavailable. And what did they send? Histoplasma, Brucella, Clostridium, and West Nile virus. Biological agents cannot be detected by human senses. A person could become a casualty before he's even aware that he's been exposed to a biological agent. An aerosol or mist of biological agent is born in the air. These agents can silently and effectively attack man, animals, plants, and in some cases, material. Agents can be tailored for a specific type of target. Methods of using anti-personnel agents undoubtedly vary so that no uniform pattern of employment or operation is evident. It's likely that agents will be used in combinations so that the disease symptoms will confuse diagnosis and interfere with proper treatment. It's also probable that biological agents could be used in heavy concentrations to ensure a high percentage of infection in a target area. The use of such concentrations could result in the breakdown of an individual immunity because the large number of microorganisms entering the body could overwhelm the natural body defenses. Types of biological weapons. Different anti-personnel agents require varying periods of time before they take effect, and the periods of time for which they will incapacitate a person also vary. Most of the diseases having anti-personnel employment potential are found among a group of diseases that are naturally transmitted between animals and man. Mankind is highly vulnerable to them since he has little contact with animals in today's urban society. The microorganisms of possible use in warfare are found in 4 naturally occurring groups: the fungi, bacteria, rickettsia, and viruses. Rickettsia are ticks. Fungi, such as yeast, to multicellular forms, such as mushrooms and puffballs. Common infections caused by fungi, ringworm, and athlete's foot. Bacteria comprise a large and varied group of organisms. They occur in varying shapes, such as rods, spheres, spirals, but they are all one-celled plants. Some bacteria can assume a resistant structure called a spore, which enables them to resist adverse environmental conditions. Others may produce poisonous substances called toxins. Examples of human disease caused by bacteria are anthrax, brucellosis, tularemia, staphylococcus, and streptococcus. Rickettsia organisms have the physical appearance of bacteria and the growth characteristics of viruses. Let's see. Members of this group must have living tissue for growth and reproduction, whereas most fungi and bacteria can be grown on artificial material. Another characteristic of rickettsia is that most diseases caused by this group are transmitted by the bite of an insect, such as mosquito, mite, or tick. Rocky Mountain spotted fever, Q fever, and typhus are diseases of mankind caused by rickettsia. Viruses, the smallest living things known to mankind, are viruses. Viruses are so small that an electron microscope is required to see them. Viruses cannot be grown in the absence of living tissue. Diseases which are caused by viruses can normally be treated with, or cannot be treated with antibiotics. Viruses can cause yellow fever, rabies, and poliomyelitis. So, mycoplasma and are molds that cause plant rot. So let's take a look at this. Antiwar.com website, May 19, 2007. Tenants, nukes, and stinking smut. George Tenet, the director of Central Intelligence responsible for providing to Congress their request a national intelligence estimate that was used as the basis for joint congressional resolution authorizing the use of U.S. armed forces against Iraq, wants desperately for you to believe now that he really believed then that our invasion force would actually find, quote, weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Interesting. Weapons of mass destruction they were looking for. Were they looking for the biological weapons that they'd sent over? Okay, so what was the biological weapon? This. Okay. Tenet may have really believed in 98 that the Iraqis hadn't destroyed all the biowarfare agent D they had produced, and it's possible Tenet didn't formally object in 2002 to the resolution wherein President Bush was authorized to do whatever he determined was, quote, necessary and appropriate, unquote, to, quote, defend the national security of the United States against the continuing threat posed by Iraq, unquote, because he believed that the Iraqis still hadn't destroyed all the biowarfare agent D they had produced. By the way, what is the biowarfare agent D? Well, it's fungus, sometimes known as stinking smut. Stinking smut attacks wheat plants, imparting to them a foul, fishy odor. Instead of producing pollen, wheat plants infected by biowarfare agent D produce a black spore, which carried by the wind to nearby uninfected wheat plants, thereby infecting them too. During the Iran-Iraq War, Saddam had produced tons of biowarfare agents and had loaded 3 or 4 different agents into bombs, artillery, projectiles, and missile warheads. Do L forms cause disease, or has science gone backwards? Which is why we're having this discussion. So there's a link here that asks, what is the difference in L forms spheroblast? Unstable E. coli L forms revisited. Growth requires peptidoglycan synthesis. They are reputed to lack peptidoglycan, although cell division is normally inseparable from septal peptidoglycan. To explore which cell division functions L-form use, we established protocol. Let's see. Bacterial L-forms are spherical, osmosensitive variants isolated from many different species, reported to have no peptidoglycan cell wall. Study of L-forms goes back to 1935, when Emmy Kleinberger succeeded in establishing a pure culture of the curious mycoplasma-like organism that appeared systematically in cultures of Streptobacillus moniliformis. It consisted of spherical, osmosensitive cells that grew on plates of hypertonic complex medium containing serum. She called the culture L1 in honor of the Lister Institute in London, where she had immigrated in 1933 when the German authorities fired her as a Jew. Similar morphological variants, also called L forms, were subsequently isolated from other bacterial species. L forms in 1942 were found to be resistant to penicillin. So these bacteria, these are morphological forms of bacteria. Okay. So African swine fever and Durlin fish. The link is dead. African swine fever and Lyme Borrelia. It's going to open very slowly. Okay. Linear plasmids of Borrelia burgdorferi have a telomeric structure and sequence similar to those of a eukaryotic virus. Spirochetes of the genus Borrelia have double-stranded linear plasmids with covalently closed ends. These findings suggest that the novel linear plasmids of Borrelia originated through a horizontal gene transfer across kingdoms. I was going to see if we describe in this study several features of the natural ends or telomeres of Borrelia linear plasmids. The structure of the telomeres was determined by direct chemical sequence analysis. The Borrelia plasmids differ from these viral genomes in some respects. The same telomeres could have arisen independently in Borrelia in an example of analogous structures and convergent evolution. In any case, this terminal configuration may contribute to genetic rearrangements with important biological consequences for these replicons and their host. Poxviruses are known to be highly recombinogenic, a characteristic which may play a role in determining host range. ASFB has telomere-associated multi-gene families which likely arose by recombination and which may vary among strains. Recombination among members of a family of surface protein genes located near the telomeres of linear plasmids also underlies the antigenic variation of the relapsing fever Borrelia hermsleyi. There you go. That's Mel consistently says Epstein Borreliosis AIDS, infinite antigenic variation, adapts to the host DNA. This is the true shapeshifter. Bacteriophage vector DNA and bioweaponeer bumbling. Tully and Shope, bioweaponeers. Let's see if this link works. Mycoplasma, sophisticated, re-emerging, and burdened by their notoriety. Mycoplasma are most unusual self-replicating bacteria possessing very small genomes, lacking cell wall, components requiring cholesterol for membrane function and growth using UGA codon for tryptophan, passing through bacterial retaining filters, and displaying genetic economy that requires a strict dependence on the host for nutrients and refuge. In addition, many of the mycoplasmas pathogenic for humans and animals possess extraordinary specialized tip organelles that mediate their intimate interaction with eukaryotic cells. This host-adapted survival is achieved through surface parasitism of target cells, acquisition of essential biosynthetic precursors, and in some cases, subsequent entry and survival intracellularly. Misconceptions concerning the role of mycoplasmas in disease pathogenesis can be directly attributed to their biological subtleties and to fundamental deficits in understanding their virulence capabilities. In this review, we highlight the biology and pathogenesis of these prokaryotes and provide new evidence that may lead to increased appreciation of their role as human pathogens. No other group of prokaryotes has been so embroiled in controversy and establishing their clear pathogenic niche as the mycoplasmids. Now, let's not forget, Mel says these are the spirochetes. This is the shapeshifter. It has it's infinite antigenic. Its morphologies are infinite. It's adapting to the host DNA. Now, and also this mycoplasma, you can't forget that this is the very thing that Craig Venter, the synthetic synthetic God, whatever you want to call him, he thinks himself God, and he's going to rewrite the biosphere. It was mycoplasma was the first Cynthia that he literally rewrote an organism. He didn't create anything in original. He overwrote an organism and recreated it into something run by a computer. Its parent was a computer. So their virulence determinants are undeniably complex, and unique biological properties likely challenge the host differently from typical bacteria pathogens. Also, numerous mycoplasma species appear to comprise the commensal microbial flora of healthy persons, and the association of these mycoplasmas with disease complicates the diagnosis and necessitates extensive and highly specific serologic, nucleic acid, and epidemiologic data. Nonetheless, mycoplasmas by themselves can cause acute and chronic diseases at multiple sites with wide-ranging complications and have been implicated as cofactors in disease. Recently, mycoplasmas have been linked as a cofactor to AIDS pathogenesis and to malignant transformation, chromosomal aberrations, the Gulf War syndrome, and other unexplained and complex illnesses, including chronic fatigue syndrome, Crohn's disease, and various arthritides. Now, chromosomal aberrations. I can't help but think of the Hala video where that lady with her ungloved hands was working with the Hala cells, and they talked about I think it had something like 200 and something chromosomes, when we normally have 23. So, they were using those cell lines actually infected all the cell lines. So, it literally has given everything spirochetal AIDS. All of us, anyone that's gotten any vaccine, They could be nothing but infectious. Historical perspectives. The earliest reports of mycoplasma as infectious appeared in 1930s and 40s. At that time, primary atypical pneumonia was associated with an infectious agent because of its minute size and innate biological properties known at that time. Passed through bacteria retaining filters, resisted penicillin and sulfonamide therapies, and adapted to growth in embryonated eggs and tissue culture cells. Correlations between the etiologic agent of walking pneumonia with viruses, L forms, and pleuropneumonia-like agents referred to as PPLOs in publications and textbooks of that area were frequent and often misleading. Finally, the definitive study in the 1960s established mycoplasma pneumonia as a singular cause of cold agglutinin-associated primary atypical pneumonia. Today, M. pneumonia remains as important cause of pneumonia and other airway disorders such as tracheobronchitis and pharyngitis, and is associated with extrapulmonary manifestations such as hematopia, I don't even know how to say that, joint, central nervous system, liver, pancreas, and cardiovascular syndromes. Yes, and its many infinite variations. Bioweapons, and let's see, who is that? Danielle, Jean-Claude. I was just seeing who the authors were, so I don't know who this Tully and Shope are. Joe Tully, the bioweaponeer of mycoplasma and tick on Medline. Tully is the author. Let's see. The Emmy Kleinenberger Nobel Award lecture reflects on recovery of some of the fastidious molecules with implications of the changing host patterns. Enhanced isolation of mycoplasma pneumonia from throat washings. It's from 1979. Spiroplasma, a new species from I don't even know how to pronounce that. Pacifist ticks collected in Oregon. That's 95. 81. Helical mycoplasmas, spiroplasmas. Mycoplasma. You see, mycoplasma is spirochetal A. It's here. We've just been so confused with there's so many names. Bioweaponeering, possibly with Rockefellers and SmithKline. Erythrocyte deformities in humans with human mycoplasma infections. L forms and mycoplasma look the same under a microscope but are different. Polyacrylamide gel identification of bacterial L forms and mycoplasma species of human origin. Identification. Let's see. All microorganisms except S. aureus Smith parent and its L form were grown in mycoplasma broth, basal medium, and provided with supplements according to their specific growth requirements. Protein present in various media formulations have not been shown to interfere with cell protein electrophoretic patterns. These studies confirm These studies confirm and extend the findings of Haas, who with different gel systems showed electrophoretic patterns of whole cells could be used to identify 6 of the known human mycoplasma serotypes and numerous clinical isolates. So this paper, we have attempted to show the value of the method as it can be applied to problems in distinguishing mycoplasmas from bacterial L phase organisms. Okay, let's see. Rockefeller University, the biology of parasitic spirochetes. The Rockefeller University Library. The biology of parasitic spirochetes. Let's see, does that have a year on it? Let me see. 1976. The ability of the Borrelia, especially tick-borne strains, to persist in the brain and the eye after treatment with arsenic or with penicillin, or even after apparent cure, is well known. The persistence of treponemes after treatment of syphilis is a major area which currently requires study. There you go. The mechanism underlying the Jarisch-Herxheimer reaction has been the object of intensive investigation. The reaction starts as the spirochetes are cleared from peripheral blood just before the spirochetes disappear, whether spontaneously or after an antibiotic. The leukocyte count falls abruptly. Both neutrophils and lymphocytes disappear. Neutrophils, also known as vacuolization of the cytoplasma, degranulation, and occasionally an engulfed spirochete was seen. Also, just before the spirochetes disappeared, they clumped, often appearing as balls 7 centimeters to or 70 to 100. I don't know what that is in diameter. These investigations postulate that the sequence of events which occurred was spontaneous or therapeutic death of the spirochetes associated with phagocytosis or with release of spirochetal endotoxin, or both, resulting in sequestration of leukocytes and the release of endogenous. All right, let me go to this one, see what it says. The ability of Borrelia, especially tick-borne strains, to persist in the brain and in the eye during remission after treatment with arsenic or penicillin, or even after apparent cure, is known. That's worth reading again. I know that was a repeat. That's important. It's relapsing fever. The term relapsing fever is applied to a group of closely allied acute infectious disorders caused by blood spirochetes and clinically characterized by recurrent paroxysm of fever separated by febrile intervals. Although there are at times variations in the clinical syndrome of relapsing fever based on whether infection is louse-borne or tick-borne, whether or not the population at risk has some level of acquired immunity, or upon geographic or spirochetal strain differences. The similarities are such that the syndromes will be considered in composite, recognizing that louse-borne relapsing fever tends to be more severe. The recent observations, and goodness gracious, louse-borne relapsing fever provided a body of information which serves not only to elucidate the pathophysiology, but from which it appears logical to extrapolate the pathophysiology of tick-borne relapsing fever. And this was 19. This is from 1950. I'm not sure the date on that one. Okay, evolution of a focus of Lyme disease. This supports the assertion that Plum Island was the original outbreak area. Evolution of a focus of Lyme disease. Epidemiological investigations were initiated in 1984 when significant Lyme disease activity was observed within a 5-kilometer radius of an area previously used as a non-endemic control site for Lyme disease research in New Jersey. Through 1983, collections of these ticks from vegetation and feral rodents were infrequent, and no human cases were identified within a 16-kilometer radius of the control site in 1984. 4 human cases, 3 serologically reactive canines were recognized within the area. So this basically, like she said, supports the assertion that Plum Island was the original outbreak area. Uncoordinated phylogeography of Borrelia burgdorferi and its tick vector. See, I want to call it iodes, and I don't even I don't even know how to pronounce it, so I apologize. I will make a point to learn how to pronounce it. Uncoordinated phylogeography of Borrelia. Vector-borne microbes necessarily co-occur with their host and vectors, but the degree which they share common evolutionary or biogeographic histories remains unexplored. We examine the congruity of the evolutionary and biogeographic histories of the bacterium and the vector of Lyme disease, the most prevalent vector-borne disease in North America. Race-specific bioweapons is moot. I have so many links open. I'm going to close. And you can, of course, find all these links within this document yourself. Okay, did that not open at all? Okay, so I'm going to go on down here. The outer surface protein A, HIVs, glycoprotein 120, and glycoprotein 41. HIV's vaccines, 1993, and Fauci's HIV patent and Fauci's immune suppression treatment patent, the PAM3-CIS, and the CCR5 in Africans. CNN, Anthony Fauci lying on national television with Lou Dobbs saying we have a Lyme vaccine. Imagine that, Fauci lying on national television. And this is the actual transcript. And Dobbs, they're talking about, let's see, I don't want to read the whole discussion. Fauci answering, well, that's exactly not quite the case. Okay, so uh, Dobbs is talking to him about Lyme disease, and he says, debilitating as well, but of a lesser threat in terms of its fatality rate. Its mortality rate is Lyme disease. Uh, it's striking that in a period of 30 years, treatment, if so, if you will, primitive, cures not at hand, diagnosis is often not available, and too many doctors simply not literate. How can this be? Fauci says, well, that's exactly not quite the case, Lou. In Lyme disease, if you get acute Lyme disease, the antibiotic treatment of that is really quite effective in curing people of it. What happens is that sometimes it goes undiagnosed or goes into a chronic form. And once it goes into a chronic form, then you have a significant problem. He says, we've had an effective vaccine, but it's the kind of vaccine that you essentially vaccinate people each year. And from the standpoint of its use, it's not been used as efficiently as it could have been used. So scientifically, we had a vaccine and still do have a vaccine, but it's not really well used. Unbelievable. Thanks, Fauci. This may be an antidote to the neuroborreliosis, the Mark Klemper seronegative kind, and post-Lymerix syndrome, immune suppression. Oh, and here, I don't know if you can type in inventor's name, so let's see. Let's see. What this is exactly. Okay, so pharmaceutical rep. Okay, so I'm not really sure what that is. But it didn't look like a patent to me, but I could be wrong. Okay, let me go back to Clueless Fauci. Let's see. Okay, thanks, Fauci. This may. Okay, I already just did that. Let's see. Scroll down for the full transcript of Klempner on tape. He says the CDC does not recognize seronegative Lyme. They only recognize bad knee, only Dearborn Lyme. And I'm going to close that. So we have Fauci. Like I said, he was lying on TV. At that time, they did not have a vaccine. I think they had already shut down the Lymerix vaccine. Okay. So this actually has, if I continue reading, this present invention pertains to a method for activating the immune system of a patient by intermittently administering interleukin-2, IL-2. So apparently, this must be Fauci's IL-2, interleukin-2. I don't know. Forgive me. I'm sorry. I'm kind of actually just going through a lot of this. It's been a long time since I've looked at it, so I'm reading it as I read it to you. If you want to talk about ethics, said Dr. Fauci, of the National Institute of Health in Maryland. You want to make sure something works before you announce it. Rolling on the floor, laughing. Yeah, all right, ethics. The conduct of Dr. Fauci and others has compromised the basic principles of ethics, public trust, and the most fundamental concepts that define scientific integrity. And I don't think this link works, but I'm going to try. Nope. Let's see if this one does. Or did I already open this? Page not found. Of course not. Okay. So there's the fraud chi, as I like to call him, or foul chi. Anyways, so we also have the toll-like receptor 2 and not 4 handles these lipoproteins. Downregulation of HLA molecules is part of the tolerization process mentioned in Chapter 10 in the biomarkers. Outer surface protein A induced interleukin 10, which is immune-suppressing cytokine. Brucella's PAM3-CIS, PAM3-CYS, lipoproteins also result in immune suppression. Brucella abortus inhibits major histocompatibility complex 2, class 2 expression and antigen processing through interleukin 6 secretion via toll-like receptor 2. So AIDS and their vaccines, brucella and their potential vaccines, Lyme and Limerix and immune Lyme, and tuberculosis and their vaccines all caused immune suppression. But thanks to Yale's deliberate criminal incompetence, none of these Limerix and chronic Lyme outcomes were investigated. Instead, the Lyme and the Limerix victims were stalked and trashed. This is a criminal matter. So they, the testing is fraudulent. It's set up to only catch the people with an arthritic knee. 85% of the people, the sicker people with the chronic long-term Lyme, are told that they're not sick. Garth Nicholson, large can of worms. Fungal infections suppress the immune system. So what happens when you suppress the immune system and you load down with all of these viruses or bacteria? Chronic mycoplasma infections in Gulf War veterans, children, and autism patients. Summary: downregulation of HLA means no antibodies are produced. Inhibition of the autokill kinases. No antibodies, and what is it that they're so obsessed with to decide whether or not you're sick is antibodies. New York Times book review on USA dumping Borrelia on China and Korea. I went to China in 1952 wanting to assess the assertions of germ warfare being one reason. Without going into the evidence, I came away convinced that Chinese officials believed that the evidence was conclusive. On returning, Alan Watt, my successor as permanent head of the Australian Department of External Affairs, informed me in the light of my public statements he had sought a response from Washington and was informed the United States had used biological weapons during the Korean War, but only for experimental purposes. That was in 1997, Dr. John Burton. Dropping the insects from the air is entirely feasible. Canadian expert in biological warfare, May 15, 1952. Let us get mobilized, attend to hygiene, reduce the incidence of disease, raise the standard of health, and crush the enemy's germ warfare. 1953. The discharged soldier Shihangra, 25, left his native place in the early mornings of March 10, 1952, carrying a sturdy travel bag, half empty. He was bound on a journey to filial duty to Chongde, a fabled city of imperial palaces that lay beyond the Great Wall, some 300 miles from his starting place in Shandong province. Okay, I won't read this whole. He was carrying, let's see. He arrived on the way he walked, probably hitched a ride on barges. After digging up his father's remains, he fell ill. He got worse the next day. They said it was pneumonia. Autopsy, I was trying to see. The autopsy pathology mentioned hemorrhages in the brain, respiratory in the lymph and adrenals, and the presence of a bacillus similar to anthrax. There you go, so anthrax. Mycoplasma and vector pathogen competence studies performed on Plum Island and in association with Yale. Recall that 3 years ago, I instructed Home Lame Stupidity, who happens to work for us, remember, since we are the government, to look into the matter of the Lyme bullshit and as regards Tully and Shope. That would be because I've read just about everything those three. There are two, Shope, Ari's father and son. They're both in the same business. I refer to Tully again in Chapter 10 on biomarkers, which is a chapter now thankfully getting much attention by referral, because Home Lame Stupidity is a joke. It was revealed to us all just 1 month later by Miss Katrina. We're still here 3 years later, still battling those Yale, NYMC, ALDF lying profiteer creeps, and we have the relentless who have the relentless audacity to claim they did not settle out of court with Mr. Blumenthal to avoid criminal charges. Yet anyone with eyes in their head can read the agreement and discover that's exactly why they're terrified. Still, it's left to the real scientists out there to reveal what the real deal of these criminals, because we have no faith in the U.S. government whatsoever. The crime belonged to the U.S. Department of Justice ever since 1998, when the FDA approved Limerix, because they were defrauded by Yale, and in particular, they were defrauded by Yale's Robert Schoen. And see Chapter 4 on what I explained to the FDA Vaccine Committee as regards the evidence that Robert Schoen has known since 1996 he could not read his Western blots in the outer surface protein A vaccinated people. Thus, I will expose what we all can find out about Plum Island and what kind of goodies they messed with there. Keep in mind that we want indictments. We want these bastards charged with every crime they committed. From the looks of things, they never appeared to investigate what the hell outer surface protein really was, and because they had first made a decision to make money off this new epidemic. I note that what happened here has similarities to Jurassic Park, where the scientists just grabbed the thing and tried to turn into a money maker without thinking of the consequences. And voila, what do you know? Michael Crichton was one of the invitees to the ALDF's.com's 2000 gala. Let's see if it will open. Okay, so this is the group. Peenies. My name is Chuck, and I love McSweeney's. The ALDF Gala event, the American Lyme Disease Foundation. Annual benefit Thursday, June 1st, 2000. Alan Steer, MD. the discoverer of Lyme disease, author and film director Michael Crichton, and former governor of Massachusetts. Imagine that. Wow, that is just creepy to me. What were they coordinating, collaborating? Wow. Okay, I lost my place there. Okay, either that's a coincidence or a sick joke, since Lyme appears to be one of the ones that got away from Plum Island. It appears, I say, since no one knows exactly what went on Plum Island, but I guess there are records of paper-clipped Nazis, and we know that OSS, CIA, Rockefellers were involved in that crazy double O medicine baloney, and have always been interested in race refinement. There is not one thing that's associated with either the Rockefellers or the Bushies that does not have the aroma of sinister. Page 60 regarding race-specific bioweapons. Let's see if we can open that. I don't think it works. No, the document won't open. Yeah. Anyways, let's move on. In the end, it's not really matter whatever the hell they did on Plum Island. I never really cared, since the issue is not how it happened, but when are we going to get better? The real deal is the country is beyond bankrupt and collapsing into the Great Depression too. There will be little for treatments and research. We lost the window of opportunity when Bush stole the election from Al Gore in 2000. God, this all sounds like deja vu. This was our last chance to retool for new energy. There will be no money to fight the global warming related emerging infectious diseases. There are new discoveries of fungi and various tick-borne diseases all the time. In 2004, there was an outbreak of 5 vector-borne diseases in one herd of cattle in Switzerland. Let's see. Concurrent infections with vector-borne pathogens associated with fatal hemolytic anemia in a cattle herd in Switzerland. And so you have to understand that's something else that Mill talks about. The cattle is 100% infected with malaria. So what do you think happens when we eat these animals? Plain old regular household molds are a problem. Rare in the house of New England that does not have a mold problem. 2 years ago, they officially moved fall foliage peak week in New England 2 weeks late into late October. Are we not to think spring might have gained an extra half month? Plum Island accidents are not the issue. Cover-up of Lyme, Limericks crime, and the deliberate falsification of diagnostic tests, vaccines, and especially the alleged treatment protocols are the issue. The only real value in revealing all we know about what happened, when, and where is the hopes that the perpetrators of these crimes against humanity committed by the Kaiser and the ALDF.com brigade are indicted, deprived of their liberty, and especially deprived of their assets, since we think the Kaiser might be worth big property, something tradable on the foreign market for something other than worthless U.S. dollars. The first record we can find on the outer surface protein A kind of antigen. 1983, synthesis of the mitogenic S23- bis palmitoyloxy propyl in palmitoyl pentapeptide, though that word is just way too long for me, from E. coli lipoprotein. The lipoprotein from the outer surface membrane of E. coli was obtained by coupling. So, that this is again the lipoprotein. What is the lipoproteins that they're using in this new vaccine? As you recall from chapter 3, this is what outer surface protein A looks like, is. This lipoprotein of E. coli is synthetic partial structure tripalmitoyl, I can't even pronounce that either, pentapeptide from an HIV vaccine. And who do you think owns a patent to the HIV vaccine? Would we venture to take a guess? We describe a peptide vaccine model based on the mimicry of surface coat protein of a pathogen. This model, see, here we go, surface coat protein of a pathogen. We describe a vaccine model. And what are we doing today? I mean, wow. The most vaccine strategy developed today against human immunodeficiency virus infection has been directed towards the humoral response of generating neutralizing antibodies. But now, no. Recent advances in mapping antigens involved in immune responses have allowed detailed characterization epitopes that confer neutralizing T helper and T cytotoxic responses. This model used a macromolecular assemblage approach to amplify peptide antigens in liposomes or micelles. The key components of the model contained an oligomeric lysine scaffolding to amplify peptide antigens covalently fourfold in the lipophilic membrane. Very interesting. Lysine, oligomeric lysine scaffolding. Wow. Okay. I need to read that a little further later. Outer surface protein A basically comes from or is common to E. coli and HIV. Some reports say that Borrelia burgdorferi and E. coli are the sources of the triacylated P3C lipopeptides, and that mycoplasma produced diacylated lipopeptides. There may be something else similar but not identical in other pathogens, but it appears that few are the sources for this particular general antigen shape, the P3C. One of the Plum Island strains of mycoplasma fungi, stealth disorders. Of course, that link doesn't work, so I think she wrote. Let's see. Immunogenic variation among the so-called LC strains of Mycoplasma mycoides, subspecies mycoides. Much evidence of immunogenic heterogeneity among the LC strains of Mycoplasma mycoides emerged from cross-immunization and hyperimmunization experiments in mice with 3 LC strains. Plum Island. Challenge purposes. All heterogeneous LC strain vaccines cross-immunized against 3 challenge strains, but protection was usually only partial, i.e. significantly less than given by a homologous vaccine. Cross-hyperimmunization with all heterologous LC but not SC strains produced protection against challenge with Von Plum Island that was virtually complete, i.e. similar to that produced of homologous vaccine. Challenge with 74 out of 2,488 gave generally similar results, but against McAfee 2833, 6 heterologous LC vaccines gave complete protection and 6 did not. Vaccines prepared from the Smith 1423 strain of M. mycoides capri gave some protection against von Plum, but none against the 74 2488 or Menkelar 2833. The cross immunity ability of 3 further M. mycoides appeared to resemble that of Smith in a cross hyperimmunization experiment. Vaccines prepared from SC strains varied greatly in their ability to protect. In other words, sounds to me like it doesn't work. So there are Plum Island strains of mycoplasma. Murdered Iraqi scientist who studied infertility in cattle due to mycoplasmas on Plum Island. Of course, that one doesn't work. How Saddam happened. Mr. Byrd, Mr. President, yesterday at a hearing at the Senate Armed Service Committee, I asked a question of the Secretary of Defense. I referred to a Newsweek article that will appear in September 23rd, 2002 edition. The article reads as follows. It's not overly lengthy. I shall read it. Beginning on page 35 of Newsweek, here's what the article says. America helped make a monster. What to do with him and what happens after he is gone has haunted us for a quarter century. This article is written by Christopher Dickey and Evan Thomas. It reads as follows. The last time Donald Rumsfeld saw Saddam Hussein, he gave him a cordial handshake. The date was almost 20 years ago, December 20, 1983. Official Iraqi television crew recorded the historic moment. The once and future defense secretary at the time, private citizen, had been sent by President Ronald Reagan to Baghdad as a special envoy. Saddam Hussein, armed with a pistol in his hip, seemed vigorous and confident, according to a now declassified State Department cable obtained by Newsweek. Rumsfeld conveyed the president's greetings and expressed his pleasure at being in Baghdad, wrote the note taker. Then the two men got down to business, talking about the need to improve relations between their two countries. Like most foreign policy insiders, Rumsfeld was aware that Saddam was a murderous thug who supported terrorists and was trying to build a nuclear weapon. The Israelis had already bombed Iraq's nuclear reactor at Osirak. But at the time, America's big worry was Iran, not Iraq. The Reagan administration feared that the Iranian revolutionaries who had overthrown the Shah and taken hostage American diplomats for 444 days in 1979-81 would overrun the Middle East and its vital oil fields on the theory that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. The Reaganites were seeking to support Iraq in a long and bloody war against Iran. The meeting between Rumsfeld and Saddam was consequential. For the next 5 years, until Iran finally capitulated, the United States backed Saddam's armies with military intelligence, economic aid, and covert supplies of munitions. Rumsfeld is not the first American diplomat to wish for the demise of a former ally. After all, before the Cold War, the Soviet Union was America's partner against Hitler in World War II. In the real world, as the saying goes, nations have no permanent friends, just permanent interests. Nonetheless, Rumsfeld's long ago interlude with Saddam is a reminder that today's friend can be tomorrow's mortal threat. As President George W. Bush and his war cabinet ponder Saddam's successor's regime, they would do well to contemplate how and why the last 3 presidents allowed the butcher of Baghdad to stay in power so long. The history of America's relations with Saddam is one of the sorrier tales in American foreign policy. Time and again, America turned a blind eye to Saddam's predations, saw him as the leader of evil, or the lesser evil, or flinched at the chance to unseat him. No single policymaker or administration deserves blame for creating or at least tolerating a monster. Many of Their decision seemed reasonable at that time. Even so, there are moments in this clumsy dance with the devil that make one cringe. It's hard to believe that during most of the 1980s, America knowingly permitted the Iraq Atomic Energy Commission to import bacterial cultures that might be used to build biological weapons. Let me read that again. It's hard to believe that during most of the 1980s, America's knowingly permitted the Iraq Atomic Energy Commission to import bacterial cultures that might be used to build biological weapons. But it happened. America's past stumbles, while embarrassingly, are not in argument for inaction in the future. Saddam probably is the grave and gathering danger described by President Bush in his speech to the United Nations last week. It may also be true that whoever replaces Saddam is not only going to be worse, as a senior administration official put it to Newsweek. The story of how America helped create Frankenstein monster is now wishes to strangle is sobering. It illustrates the power of wishful thinking, as well as the iron law of unintended, as the iron, maybe it's supposed to be ironic, as the iron law of unintended consequences. America did not put Saddam in power. He emerged after 2 decades of turmoil in the 80s or the 60s and 70s, and various strongmen tried to gain control of a nation that had been concocted by British imperialists in the 1920s. Out of the 3 distinct and rival factions, the Sunnis, Shiites, and the Kurds. But during the Cold War, America competed with the Soviets for Saddam's attention and welcomed his war with the religious fanatics of Iran. Having cozied up to Saddam, Washington found it hard to break away, even after going to war with him in 1991. Through years of both tacit and overt support, the West helped create the Saddam of today, giving him time to build deadly arsenals and dominate his people. Successive administrations always worried that if Saddam fell, chaos would follow, rippling through the region and possibly igniting another Middle East war. At times it seemed that Washington was transfixed by Saddam. The Bush administration wants to fully break the spell. If the administration's true believers are right, Baghdad after Saddam falls will look something like Paris after the Germans fled in 1944. American troops will be cheered as liberators, and democracy will spread forth and push Middle Eastern despotism back into the shadows. Yet, if the gloomy predictions of the administration's many critics come true, the Arab Street, inflamed by Yankee imperialism, will rise up and replace the shaky but friendly autocrats in the region with Islamic fanatics. While the Middle East is unlikely to become a democratic nirvana, the worst-case scenarios, always staple of the press, are probably wrong or exaggerated, assuming that a cornered and doomed Saddam does not kill thousands of Americans in some kind of horrific Gorder-Damarung, I don't even know how to say that, a scary possibility, one that deeply worries administration officials. The greatest risk of all is his fall. The greatest risk of his fall is that one strong man may simply be replaced by another. Saddam's successor may not be a paranoid sadist, but there's no assurance that he will be America's friend or forswear the development of weapons of mass destruction. American officials have known that Saddam was a psychopath. Get that. American officials have known that Saddam was a psychopath ever since he became the country's de facto ruler in the early 1970s. One of Saddam's early acts after he took the title of president in 1979 was to videotape a session of his party's Congress, during which he personally ordered several members executed right on the spot. American officials have known that Saddam was a psychopath ever since he became the country's de facto ruler in the early 1970s. His first act, he took title of president was to videotape a session of his party's Congress during which he personally ordered several members executed on the spot. This message, carefully conveyed to the Arab press, was not that these men were executed for plotting against Saddam, but rather for thinking about plotting against him. From the beginning, U.S. officials worried about Saddam's taste for nasty weaponry. Indeed, at their meeting in 1983, Rumsfeld warned that Saddam's use of chemical weapons might inhibit American assistance. But top officials in the Reagan administration saw Saddam as a useful surrogate. By going to war with Iran, he could bleed the radical mullahs who had seized control of Iran from the pro-American Shah. Some Reagan officials even saw Saddam as another Anwar Sadat, capable of making Iraq into a modern secular state, just as Sadat had tried to lift up Egypt before his assassination in 1981. But Saddam had to be rescued first. The war against Iran was going badly in 1982. Iran's human wave attacks threatened to overrun Saddam's armies. Washington decided to give Iraq a helping hand. After Rumsfeld's visit to Baghdad in 1983, U.S. intelligence began supplying the Iraqi dictator with satellite photos showing Iranian deployments. Official documents suggest that America may have also secretly arranged for tanks and other military hardware to be shipped to Iraq in a swap deal. The American tank to Egypt, Egyptian tanks to Iraq. Over the protest of some Pentagon skeptics, the Reagan administration began allowing the Iraqis to buy a wide variety of dual-use equipment and materials from the American suppliers. According to the confidential Commerce Department export control documents obtained by Newsweek, the shopping list included a computerized database for Saddam's Interior Ministry, presumably to help keep track of politician opponents, helicopters to transport Iraqi soldiers, television cameras for video surveillance applications, chemical analysis equipment for the Iraq Atomic Energy Commission, and most unsettling, numerous shipments of, quote, bacteria, fungi, protozoa, unquote, to the IAEC. According to former officials, the bacterial cultures could be used to make biological weapons, including anthrax. The State Department also approved the shipment of 1.5 million atropine injectors for use against the effects of chemical weapons. But the Pentagon blocked the sale. The helicopters, some American officials later surmised, were used to spray poison gas on the Kurds. The United States almost certainly knew from its own satellite imagery what Saddam was using chemical weapons against Iranian troops, that when Saddam bombed Kurdish rebels and civilians with a lethal cocktail of mustard gas, sarin, taboon, and VX in 1988. The Reagan administration first blamed Iran before acknowledging, under pressure from congressional Democrats, that the culprits were Saddam's own forces. There was only a token official protest at the time. Saddam's men were unfazed. An Iraqi audio tape later captured by the Kurds records Saddam's cousins Ali Hassan al-Majid, known as Ali Chemical, talking to his fellow officers about gassing the Kurds. Who's going to say anything, he asked. The international community? Fuck them. The United States was much more concerned with protecting the Iraqi oil from attacks by Iran as it was shipped through the Persian Gulf. In 1987, an Iraqi Exocet missile hit an American destroyer, the USS Stark, in the Persian Gulf, killing 37 crewmen. Incredibly, the United States excused Iraq for making an unintentional mistake and instead used the incident to accuse Iran of escalating the war in the Gulf. The American tilt to Iraq became more pronounced. U.S. commandos began blowing up Iranian oil platforms and attacking Iranian patrol boats. In 1988, the American warship in the Gulf accidentally shot down an Iranian Airbus, killing 290 civilians. Within a few weeks, Iran, exhausted and fearing American intervention, gave up the war with Iraq. Saddam was feeling cocky with the support of the West, and he had defeated the Islamic revolutionaries in Iran. America favored him as a regional pillar. Europe and, European and American corporations were vying for contracts with Iraq. He was visited by congressional delegates led by Senator Bob Dole of Kansas and Alan Simpson of Wyoming, who were eager to promote American farm and business interests, but Saddam's megalomania was on the rise, and he overplayed his hand. In 1990, a U.S. Customs sting operation snared several agents who were trying to buy electronic equipment used to make triggers for nuclear bombs. Not long after, Saddam gained the world's attention by threatening to burn Israel to the ground. At the Pentagon, analysts began to warn that Saddam was a growing menace, especially after he tried to buy some American-made high-tech furnaces useful for making nuclear bomb parts. Yet other officials in Congress and in the Bush administration continued to see him as useful, distasteful regional strongman. The State Department was equivocating with Saddam right up to the moment he invaded Kuwait in 1990. Mr. President, I refer to this Newsweek article yesterday as a hearing of the Senate Armed Services Committee. Specifically, during the hearing, I asked Secretary Rumsfeld, Mr. Secretary, to your knowledge, did the United States help Iraq to acquire the building blocks of biological weapons during the Iran-Iraq war? Are we, in fact, now facing the possibility of reaping what we have sown? The Secretary quickly and flatly denied any knowledge, but he said he would review Pentagon records. I suggest the administration speed up that review. My concerns and the concerns of others have grown. A letter from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, which I shall submit for the record, shows very clearly that the United States is, in fact, preparing to reap what has sown. Letter written in 1995 by former CDC Director David Satcher to former Senator Donald Regal Jr. points out that the U.S. government provided nearly 24 viral and bacterial samples to Iraq scientists in 1985, samples that included the plague, botulism, and anthrax, among other deadly diseases. According to the letter from Dr. Satcher to former Senator Donald Regal, many of the materials were carried by an Iraqi scientist to Iraq after he'd spent 3 months training at the CDC laboratory. The Armed Services Committee is requesting information from the Departments of Commerce, State, and Defense on the history of the United States providing the building blocks for weapons of mass destruction to Iraq. I recommend that the Department of Health and Human Services also be included in that request. The American people do not need obfuscation and denial. The American people need the truth. The American people need to know whether the United States, in large part, responsible for the very Iraqi weapons of mass destruction which the administration now seeks to destroy. We may very well have created the monster that we seek to eliminate. The Senate deserves to know the whole story. The American people deserved answers to the whole story. Also, yesterday, in the same 6 minutes that I was given in which to ask questions, was extended by virtue of the kindness of the distinguished senator from Georgia, Mr. Max Cleland, and other members of the committee. So it was perhaps 9 or 10 minutes. Therefore, another interesting question that I asked. Let me read a portion of that transcript from the Armed Services Committee. I'll stop right there, but we were sending biological weapons to Iraq. What was the fungi, and what do we know about stinking mutt? It would seem that the UNSCOM weapons inspectors had found any biowarfare agents that we had sold Saddam. Then, methinks, someone with a government domain could be guilty of a war crime. The only people squawking about it is Iran, and they don't count since they have oil and they're not in the USA, which makes them bad terrorists and insane, threatening criminals, etc., Islamic fascists, Hitler's intent on global extermination, Christianity and Judaism, and so on and so on. And faster, please, and all the very-assed neocon bullshit. Iran exists and they're not Israelis. Iran is an existential threat to Israel. The ALDF exists and they're not truthful, and the ALDF is an existential threat to mankind and must be wiped off the map. Experiment. Everyone should be able to try this crazy bullshit and see that they don't get carried off to the nearest psychiatric emergency room. Only the Israeli cons get away with it because crazy is not crazy when it's referring to Israelis. Everyone knows that that's just how they are. No one cares. This is not pursued. White phosphorus, anthrax, all sorts of illegal biological and chemical weapons were and are used in Iran, Iraq, but supplied by the U.S. and the UK. It's no big deal. It's only a big deal when Israeli U.S. scientists who worked at Fort Detrick mailed some around the U.S. after 9/11 and tried to blame it on the Arabs. Zach and the dancing Israelis and whoever else from Israel is allowed to do whatever they want in America and then go back home. Like the State Department's Mark Grossman and Cybele Edmonds, like Michael Leedon and the fake Niger letter. There are tons of crime out there, and whoever's is pretty much immune to prosecution. If that doesn't get me censored and taken down, we'll be very lucky. So there was a murdered Iraqi scientist who worked in the United States with mycoplasma with regard to causing bovine infertility. So far, no big secrets. Mycoplasma are a rather new discovery. J.G. Tully was fascinated with them, and spiroplasma. Tully on mycoplasma associated with arthritis and immune suppression. Emerging infectious diseases. No more. Of course, they wiped that out. Naturally occurring and experimentally induced mycoplasma arthritis. Okay, so we have a copy of it on here. My legs are getting cramped from the way I'm sitting. Okay. Medline search for mycoplasma in L form. Wow, look at that. You can't even get a link. Interesting that they would take that away. Just the search term. Okay. Department of Pathology, State University of New York, Stony Brook. Aggregations of spheroplast. Following 4 hours of incubation of spirochetes. It's not coming in very clearly, I know. The formation of spheroplast ultimately leads to cell death. In our studies, only mutants grow after treatment of spirochetes. The spontaneous aggregation of spheroblasts seen in our experiments, as well as in previous study, could be responsible for the actual decrease in numbers of organisms in experiments where enumeration has been used to measure cell death. Spiroplast induced by buffered lysosome. In both studies, the presence of outer surface protein A and outer surface protein B, and of outer surface protein A and outer surface protein B MAB, monoclonal antibody complexes in this spheroplast also supports the evidence of periplasmic or cell membrane location of these lipoproteins, since spheroplasts lack an outer membrane. Reversion of cyst form to intact spirochetes within 1 minute of addition of rabbit blood. So these are the morphological forms. You have the cyst forms where it rolls into a ball. And then added some good old food and rabbit food, and it will turn right back into a spirochete. If spirochetes, when driven into the cyst form, replicate, do we end up with even more spirochetes than we would have had had we not taken antibiotics? Fickrig mentions that outer surface protein A vaccination makes the spirochete population increases in ticks in the presence of outer surface protein A antibodies. Proposed life cycle for the reader treponomy. Validity of cyst or spheroplast or regenerative forms. In 1982, Willy Berdorfer and he should have been the one that it was credited to, finding the spirochetes, in discovering them, but he was not. Composite large spirochetes from microbial mat spirochete structure review. Morphological changes may be responsible for relapsing, persisting illness. Imagine that. So I know this has taken some time and I haven't even gotten through this whole document. Let's see. Okay, we have this little part here. I'm going to read from Horowitz. Mycoplasma has been shown to be involved in the alteration of several eukaryotic cell functions, such as cytokine production, gene expression, and more. We previously reported that infection of human myelomonocytic U937 cell line with live Mycoplasma fermentans inhibited tumor necrosis factor TNF-alpha induced apoptosis. Mycoplasma membrane lipoproteins are considered to be the most potent initiators of inflammatory reactions in mycoplasmal infections. The aim of this study was to clarify whether the inhibitory effect of TNF-alpha induced apoptosis is exerted by the Mycoplasma fermentans lipoproteins. Significant reduction in the TNF-alpha induced apoptosis was demonstrated by stimulation. Let's see. Our results suggest that the inhibitory effect exerted by Mycoplasma fermentans on TNF-alpha induced apoptosis in U937 cells is due to the membrane lipoproteins of these bacteria. You know what? I just want to type in something right quick. That's not what I wanted to do. Mycoplasma, outer surface protein, and I'm just wondering about this spike protein, and are they using something mycoplasma in this for some way? Concomitant infection with COVID-19 and mycoplasma. It's an atypical bacteria. Yes, well, okay. I will look for that on my own time. But basically, doesn't it sound like, deja vu, that much of this stuff about the Lyme and the Lyme vaccine we're dealing with now with the COVID-19 and the rollout. And they're talking about the possible lab leak. It's a bioweapon. And can you make a vaccine against a bioweapon? Is the vaccine itself a bioweapon, since it's supposedly a replication of of the virus. It's what are the parts that make up this vaccine? Spirochetes, mycoplasma. Yeah, these are war crimes. I mean, Fauci is not going. Nothing's going to happen to him. I mean, look at this guy has been at it for a long time. He has patents. He's still trying to uh, get vaccines out so that he can profit from the suffering and the misery of other people. Well, if you've managed to stay with me this long, I really appreciate you taking the time to listen. Uh, Let me know what your thoughts are. Thanks.